I still remember the day my mother cried because of money. It was late at night, and the house was quiet. I had woken up to get water from the kitchen when I saw her sitting on the floor, her back against the wall. Her hands covered her face, and her shoulders moved up and down like she was trying to hold something in. I froze. My mother was strong. She never cried, not in front of me, at least. But that night, she did. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but I already knew. We had been struggling. Ever since my father passed away, things had been hard. Money came and went too fast, like water slipping through our fingers. Some days, she would sit at the table, staring at a piece of paper with numbers on it, shaking her head. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then, I slowly walked over and sat beside her on the floor. She didn't say anything. After a while, she wiped her face, patted my shoulder, and told me to go back to bed. I did. But I didn't sleep. That night, I promised myself something. I would never let money make my mother cry again. Years passed. I finished school, and for the first time, I felt like I was stepping into the real world. But the real world is not as simple as I thought. After months of searching, I finally got my first job. It didn't pay much, just enough for transport, food, and little things here and there. But I was earning my own money. That feeling was something else. I felt grown, like I was finally becoming the man I had promised myself to be. The first month, I took some of my money and bought my mother something small, a scarf she had been eyeing in the market. She smiled when I gave it to her, and in that moment, I felt proud. Like I was doing something right. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. Halfway through the month, I ran out of money. Completely. I had spent it too fast without even realizing it. Small things here and there, a little extra transport, a snack I didn't need, helping a friend with something, and before I knew it, my pockets were empty. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. Next month would be better. But the same thing happened again. And again. I started borrowing from friends, promising to pay back once my salary came in. And I did pay back, but then I had nothing left for myself. It became a cycle. Get paid, spend too fast, borrow, get paid again, repeat. One day, my mother noticed. She had been watching quietly, waiting for me to figure it out on my own. But that evening, she finally spoke. She called me to the table and placed something in front of me. A small wooden box. This, she said, is how I survived after your father passed. I opened it. Inside, I saw small envelopes, each labeled with something: house, food, emergency, and tomorrow. I looked at her, confused. What is this? She smiled. This is what saved us. Every time I got money, no matter how small, I put something in each envelope. Because life will always ask for more than you expect. And if you don't plan, you'll always be running. I sat there, thinking. I had been earning money, but I had not been managing it. I spent without thinking about what I would need later. And every time something unexpected happened, I had no plan. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Money was not just about how much I made, it was about how I used it. I had been running, just like she said. And I was already getting tired. That was the day I first learned about the life stages of finance planning. After that night, I decided to try my mother's method. It felt strange at first, dividing my money into different parts like that. I had always thought money should just sit in one place until I needed it. But clearly, that wasn't working for me. So, when my next salary came, I took out some envelopes, just like my mother's. I labeled them: food, transport, emergency, and savings. I won't lie, the first few months were hard. I was used to spending money freely, not thinking too far ahead. But now, I had to stop and ask myself, which envelope should this money come from? Do I really need to buy this? It was frustrating. Sometimes I wanted to ignore the envelopes and just spend the way I used to. But then, something happened. One day, my phone fell and broke. Normally, this would have been a disaster. Before, I would have had to borrow money or go weeks without a phone. But this time, I had money in my emergency envelope. I took it out and bought a used phone the same day. That was the first time I felt what real financial freedom was. It wasn't about being rich, it was about being prepared. As time went on, I noticed something about money. It wasn't just about how much I earned. It was about what stage of life I was in and how I handled it. At first, when I was younger, I only thought about spending. I had no income, so whenever I got money from my mother or a relative, I used it immediately. Then, when I started earning, I realized spending wasn't the only thing that mattered. I had to save too. I had to plan for things I couldn't see yet. But later, I saw my older friends doing something different. They weren't just saving money, they were using money to make more money. Some were buying land, some were investing in small businesses, some were even looking at things like stocks. That's when I realized something important. Money moves in stages. And if I didn't move with it, I would always be playing catch up. One day, I had a conversation with an old friend from school. His name was Ton, and he had always been smart. But when we talked, I noticed something. Ton had a good job, better than mine. But he was still struggling with money. Bro, I don't understand, he said, shaking his head. I earn way more than I did before, but somehow, it's never enough. I don't even know where my money goes. I laughed because I knew that feeling too well. Do you plan your money? I asked. He frowned. What do you mean? So, I told him about my mother's box. The envelopes. The way I started dividing my money and making sure I was always ready for the next stage of life. Ton was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I always thought I just needed to earn more to fix my money problems. But now that I think about it, the more I earn, the more I spend. I've never actually planned anything. That conversation stuck with me. Many people think making more money is the answer. And yes, earning more helps. But if you don't know how to manage what you have, no amount of money will ever feel like enough. A few months later, I started thinking about the future. I had learned how to control my spending and save for emergencies. But was that enough? One day, I sat with my mother again. I've been saving, I told her. But what happens next? She smiled. Then you start growing. I frowned. Growing. She nodded. Money is like a plant. First, you put it in the ground, that's your savings. But if you leave it there forever, it just sits. It doesn't do anything. You have to water it, take care of it, let it grow. That's what investing is. I had never thought about it that way before. Saving was good, but money that just sits there loses value over time. I needed to find ways to grow it. That's when I started looking into investments. I wasn't ready to jump into big things like real estate or stocks yet, but I began learning. I asked questions. I watched how others were doing it. And slowly, I moved from just saving to planning for the future. Looking back, I realized how much my mindset had changed. At first, I only thought about getting money. Then, I learned how to manage money. And finally, I started looking at how to make money work for me. That's when I fully understood what my mother had been teaching me. Managing money is not just about how much you make, it's about knowing which stage of life you're in and planning for the next one. Because life doesn't wait. It keeps moving. And if you're not ready, you'll always be playing catch up. And that's why financial experts call it the life stages of finance planning.